Hey everybody, there are 4 people watching. Happy Colorist Appreciation Day to everybody. We are going to have a great group of people. Everybody's already sitting in the green room. We've got a bunch of colorists who are going to talk about their craft and comics, and we are going to have a great time. I don't want to keep anybody waiting, so I hope you've all had a great day. But I'm gonna bring in my my guest co-host, Chris Sotomayor, who has graciously agreed to help me with this, and he is a very good friend and is one of the nicest people in comics you'll ever meet. And let's take a quick look about who this is. What? Welcome. Hey, happy Colorist Appreciation Day.
Thank you. That was so sweet of you. Thanks.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. So I want to talk about, I want us all to talk about coloring. And before we get too into it, I kind of want to break down, and one of our guests is going to have a lot to say about this. But I remember one of the first things when I was reading comics, and this was an early comic that I was reading, like understanding that the different roles that comic book professionals have, that there was a colorist.
Right.
Like, do you remember when you became aware of that as a job or as a skill, other than some guy drawing and with crayons and stuff?
Right. I think that hit me hardest when I saw Elektra Lives Again.
Okay.
Just because it was something I hadn't seen before, and it really unlocked something in me, and it made me aware of how much a colorist could bring to the table, to a project. And I know that was, it's a Blue Line project, so it's not typical comics.
Sure.
Um,
Lynn did Lynn do that?
Yeah, that was Lynn Varley,
and she painted almost everything, right?
Yeah, it was stunning, especially when it came out, and as young as I was, it just completely blew me away. And at that point, it seemed to me like something I might be interested in doing. I've always wanted to be a penciler, of course, especially when I was that young. But that book kind of opened up the world of color to me, and to what it could do and provide to the story and just the overall look of a book.
That's that. I get you. I was tempted to bring in the Dark Knight covers, because those were huge for me. The Dark Knight covers were the concept of what that did was transformative for me. But what first made me aware of it was this. Do you remember this?
Yes.
This is Donna's wedding.
Yes.
And this is Wonder Woman talking to the colorist, and who is Adrian Roy.
Right.
And she says, Gar told me that you worked out the color and the decorations for the party. And I thought that was so beautiful, because like the concept that she was the decorator, the person who brings it to life, and like that concept was there. I don't know. This was what made me realize that there was such a job as a colorist, and that they were part of a team that made this comic.
Yeah.
And of course, Marvin George putting her in the book was wonderful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And her work has been such a mainstay at DC.
Right.
Iconic to see her name alongside, all the heavy hitters, because she was herself a heavy hitter as far as I was concerned.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for everybody out there who's waiting to see other people, and I am too, that's why this is like, I want to talk to everybody. So we're going to bring everybody in, one at a time, and kind of say hi. But I have something prepared for each of them. So we're gonna start in last name alphabetical order and go that way. So give me a second. So the next person that we're going to bring into the chat is a Ringo Award winner, best best colorist of the year, and a phenomenal artist. And so here's this. Hi, Tamara.
Hello.
Hi, Tamara. Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks for doing this. I am a huge fan of yours. I think you are amazing. I wanted to tell you that the last cover that I put in there, the Darkest Wish cover. I remember when I got that book, that cover just jumped out at me, and I thought it was so brilliant how Tess had flipped the characters, and what you did on top of it was just wonderful. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And without further ado, let's bring everybody else in so we can talk about cool stuff. So here in a second. Hi, Marissa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. You are the colorist of one of my favorite and most underrated comic books ever, and that is Grumble.
My niche is underappreciated comics.
Well,
so
that's unfair.
Love to hear that. Thank
That
you.
is unfair, but you do work on some pretty amazing and underappreciated work. I will agree.
Yeah, I think it's because I do weird and nonsensical things. So it's the price of freedom, right?
Awesome. Yeah.
Well, so since we have the two Marissa and Tamara, you guys worked together on a book, and before we get everybody else, you guys colored the Milk Wars books.
Yeah.
How did that process work together?
Go ahead, Tamara.
It's been a while. Did we do the same issue, or we just did different books in the series?
I think that the Doom Patrol and JLA, there was a JLA Doom Patrol and a Doom Patrol JLA, but you guys are both colorists on that. How did that work out?
Yeah, we were working. It was a very tight schedule, and it was a series that Tamara had developed the color on. And so what we basically did was divide up the scenes.
Okay.
And I took instruction from Tamara, and then just did my best to match what she was thinking and build on that. And then I think you did 2 books in the Milk Wars, right? Or was it 3?
It all kind of. I remember working on 2 different artists now, because I do remember that now. That was who was that artist? Because I remember that guy.
I don't have it.
Anyway,
I know.
Yeah.
We didn't know there was going to be a pop quiz. We would have prepared.
Well, you don't have to. That's fine.
But yeah, like I think that was like a later issue maybe, and I have like a very particular way of how I set up palettes and stuff. And
Ron is in the chat.
No, I noticed. So I have like it set up in like layers and stuff, and I just like, here's my layers, just do this, and like kind of tried to match it as best as we could. But I think we might have been a couple different artists on it too. So
yeah,
we did our best to match it up.
Yeah, we did. I remember we did 2 things, and then I also had the Wonder Woman Milk Wars.
Yes.
Oh no, wait! It was 1 issue, but there was so many effects it looked like multiple issues. That's what it was. This was a complicated book from a while ago, and we were talking every night about what the plan was and like what was possible to get done and how we could allocate the work. So it was a lot
guys
of
were coordinating.
I've had conversations with Steve
on those books. I think I'm sorry.
I'm just saying, I have had conversations with Steve Orlando about what went into the ideas behind what was going on there, and his conversations with Gerard about it. So I'm sure it was chaos.
It was. I think I did send a slightly unhinged 3 a.m. email.
I'm sure. We got a bunch of people in the chat, so we'll try and get the comments up here. Nick Filardi's in there.
It wouldn't be comics if it wasn't chaotic.
Yeah, right.
And I want to get to that. So I want to bring
email.
in our other guests, but there's something that I want to get to. I have something kind of hanging on prepared that I wanted to talk to you guys about. So 1 second, let's get to our next guest. Hey, Paul.
Hello, everybody. How are you?
Hey,
Thanks
Paul.
for joining us. I wanted to kind of talk about the couple of, when I was doing this and trying to make sure I had stuff to talk about for each of you. When I was looking for covers, there's so many that I could have picked from yours.
I love that you pulled that Section 8 cover up. That's so obscure compared to so many other things.
But it is amazing. The greens, the way that you handled so many different shades of green in that's what really stood out to me. It was just amazing. Like it really stood out as something that, that's the work that a colorist does to add so much texture and layer to it that, you don't get from the pencils.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate it. Also, the Ultimates one is important because it's an iconic cover, #1, and, it's responsible for the MCU. So there you go.
It just did sort of a reworking of that. Brian Hitch did a kind of a new version of the Avengers, the classic Jack Kirby Avengers 4 cover, but drawn in that same Ultimate style with the sunburst behind it and everything. And you'll be seeing that soon. So.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, like that, it's a great cover. I mean, the concept and the way that you executed creating the light, with putting the characters in shadow because we didn't know what they were until we opened up the book, and they looked like Avengers, but they weren't Avengers, and that was important. I think it was really brilliant the way everything worked out.
It helped that Hitch drew them in silhouettes too. So
well, yeah, sure, but like you had to illuminate it so that the silhouettes looked like silhouettes and not just black. And that's one of the things that a lot of people, kind of miss about, colorists. From my perspective, if anybody wants to jump in, Chris, you're the teacher here.
I would actually like to say that Paul's work is just across the board dynamic, and one of the things I like about Paul's work is that you can tell he's a constant problem solver, right? Paul is just always trying to figure out the best approach to whatever is on the page and how to make it dynamic enough that the reader's just sucked in, and he can make any color combination work.
I will say though, and when we bring in Anthony Tolan, I'd like to ask him this too, because with all these colors here, how much of your day is spent fixing artists, pencilers and inkers' work, or hiding things that you don't want the eye to go to because there's a really bad part of the drawing in there, and problem solving is a big part of the colorist's job.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, I just did a bunch of that last week. So.
All right.
Yeah,
so
Tony Tolan did it all with flat color in the 70s and 80s. I mean, it was amazing what he and Adrian Roy did.
Yeah.
Right, we're going to get to some of that. We have some things to look at related to that. And we have some color things. Ramon and Sophie are jumping in here. Ramon says that his favorite color is green, and he wants to know what are other people's favorite colors. You guys have any opinion? Because apparently Sophie's favorite is when Tamara colors stuff purple.
Well, there you go. Purple probably up there.
Tamara makes it work, though. Tamara makes it work so that it looks fresh all the time.
Well, I mean, I will say that that's true. Like if you look at this, and I'll bring it in real quick.
I think one thing that people maybe don't appreciate, people who don't have the technical knowledge don't appreciate, is that purple and green are two very close to the edge of the gamut colors. So it's really special that Tamara can make those work so well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and here's an example. You know, the way that this is a beautiful color. That's why I picked it specifically.
Makes sense.
I'm partial to neon brown myself. That's always been my favorite color. So,
right.
tough color to work with.
Yeah,
another edge of gamut.
Right.
All right. On that note, let's get Tony in here. Here we go. Hi, Tony. How are you?
Fine. And by the way, my favorite color is a rich cobalt blue.
Excellent.
It's a great color.
Choice. Excellent choice. So, Paul, would you like to start interviewing Anthony? You have questions.
Oh no, we were just talking about problem solving and you know, especially with what you did with flat color in the 70s and 80s, you and Adrian Roy both, and how many hundreds of issues of, say, Batman and Detective that she colored, all the different books you colored. How much of it was covering up bad drawing, making sure the eye went to the good parts of the drawing, and telling the story that the pencil and inker couldn't tell?
Not that much, because we were on pretty much the top books generally.
Yeah.
Between the two of us, we probably colored 85% of the top selling books at DC. But we were very much taught by Jack Adler, who, of course, had developed the color separation method back in the 30s. You know, to tell the story, to focus the attention on what was important, to kill what was unimportant. And in that way, the colorist is really much like a movie cinematographer. The cinematographer never touches the camera. He lights the scene. He focuses the attention through lighting and color on what you're supposed to see. By the way, in talking, your two female members were earlier talking about working on the same thing. As deadlines got worse and worse, because most of our hot books were late before we got them.
What?
Most of what Adrian and I colored after, sometime 83 or so, was as a team. Often one of us would do the first half of the book and the other the second half, and then we trade pages when we were tired of it. We'd both been trained by Jack Adler. We weren't throwing colors around indiscriminately. You know, we were, establishing the scene. When the scene changed, of course, the color changed to indicate that. So the first 10 pages of Batman number 500, I colored solo, because Adrian was working on another book, Teen Titans or something, that was very late. So we were mostly a team. Covers I colored solo, but we were both very lucky to be trained by Jack Adler and Salt Harrison.
No relation.
And Adrian.
Well, I just wanted to kind of talk about, so I have here, this is a color guide that I found of Adrian's of a Titans page. And for people who aren't familiar with this, could somebody who wants to talk about how this is done? This page was black and white that she colored, and then how does a color guide process work?
We had 25 on most comic books, 25, 50, and 100% values, just 3 values of each color. And for a long time, when I was including when I started out, you couldn't use the 25% on flesh. We were just having a 25% red for flesh. And that was the case in much of the Silver Age, where DC really had just the solid yellow and then 3 values of red and blue. On the Baxter books, the higher end books, we had 4 values, 25, 50, 75, and 100. On the Shadow Strikes, one of the things that hasn't been mentioned is how one needed to color differently for different paper stock. When we started having the Baxter books on the higher end white paper, the ink tended to sit on top of the page rather than being absorbed into it like newsprint. So when I did the Shadow Strikes, I didn't want the day glow look that tended to go with the Baxter books. So I traded in the 100% values of red, yellow, and blue for 10 and 20% gray tones on the black plate. And I wanted more of a rotogravure look for the 1930s. So I used nothing more than a 75% of red, yellow, and blue on those on the Shadow Strikes.
So it's interesting. So Tony, just Nick Filardi wants to know if you have like tons and tons of marked up color guides sitting in your house somewhere.
Not as much as I used to have, but I still have quite a few, and I have portfolios I bring to convention, and my daughter has a lot of Adrian's color guides.
That's awesome.
And she just sold some of them, and to help give a down payment on a new house. But
that is a blessing.
By the way, Katrina, our daughter, is the youngest person ever to have a professional assignment from DC or Marvel.
Really?
She colored 2 pages of the Ambush Bug Nothing Special and got a paycheck in her name.
That's fantastic.
When she was 4 years old.
Wow.
And immediately after it, I was riding out in a van to PulpCon with Paul Beckton, who was a staff colorist at Marvel. And when he heard that Katrina had colored 2 pages, and he said, she got her a check, and I said, yes. And he said, what was her rate? And I told Paul, and Paul said, that's $2 more a page than I get at Marvel. A 4-year-old is being paid better. I've been coloring for 10 years, and a 4-year-old is getting paid better than me.
Yeah,
of course, they just to make things easy for bookkeeping, given Katrina, Adrian, and my rate. But
sure. I want to kind of like move it around. I have a question, Marissa. It's a double question. Like, how did you get into coloring, and what was your first job? Since we're talking about first jobs.
I don't think I can remember my first job. It was probably something for oh, now his name escapes me. It was probably something for very, very cheap. Oh no, wait. You know what my first job was actually? It was I broke in doing flats for Bill Crabtree and Nolan Woodard.
Okay.
Was how I was started. And so I do like Nolan would assign me his most intense flats. And I would get those done. I liked comics as a kid, like a normal human being. And then I wanted to do it, but the workload seemed insurmountable, to draw and color and write and all that. And I didn't know they were separate jobs because I was going through the dollar bin. So it was stuff without covers and it's not high quality stuff. And then when I was an adult, I ended up working as a barista where Dave Stewart got his coffees sometimes. And we just were chatting and asked him what he did, and he said he was an illustrator, and I asked for his card because I had gone to art school and I was still trying to make it as an artist. And I was always trying to find avenues for that. And then when I realized who he was, my brain exploded because I had read all his comics when I was a kid, and like his color was really important to me. Like I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so there was the Dark Horse Comics stocked our libraries. So I read tons of his stuff, and it was always so beautiful. I would like look at the pages all the time. And then like once I had that realization that it was an actual job that I could do, I was like, I just focused all my energy on that.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. That is really great.
Did you learn who he was by Googling him, or did he mention it? Or
no, when I took his business card, it showed a Hellboy on there, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. And then I thought to like actually look at one of the comics and find his name, and we were off to the races.
There you go. That that's connection. Fantastic. Good.
I want to kind of talk about something kind of interesting. This kind of leads into kind of it's a question for Paul for the most part, and Chrissy as well. What is it like? So Paul, if I'm looking at a cover that Amanda Connor has drawn, you have colored it, like for the most part. Let's be honest. And so how does that having a close relationship with a particular artist work? And Chris, if you can lean in, because your relationship with Dennis and Bill and you coloring them as often as you do. How does that work when you have that relationship with a line artist and an experience? Is it different than other jobs, or is it just the same?
You go first, Paul.
Yeah, it always amazes me working with any penciler or inker when they don't have any input and they don't care so much. It's like they're done with their job; they just hand it off to the colorist. I'd much rather work with somebody like Amanda or Brian Hitch or people like that, where we'll be on the phone. We'll be on the phone for hours and hours, and there are times when I just have to cut Amanda off because she will zoom in on a pixel by pixel level to make adjustments to things and stuff like that. Amanda, no one's going to see that. I'm not going to open the file again and change that. So you can your OCD will be satisfied. Steve Rude was the same way. I'd be on the phone with hours and hours of Steve Rude going through pages, but they care.
I have Steve Rude
I like that
too.
Oh, I'm sure you do. It really is Steve Rude question. Yeah, and Chris is laughing because I'm sure you've worked with Steve Rude too, right, Chris?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've been on the phone with him too. Yeah. It's a treat. Your relationship is a little different. Like you're dealing with Amanda is a little different than mine with Dennis, because Dennis just kind of lets me go off to the races. Yeah. I mean, we've known each other for a long time, longer than we've been working together, I guess. Although even our working together predates our current working together. But yeah, he kind of just lets me go off, and I'll kick stuff over to him, and he does this thing where he goes, "What do you think about it?" And then I'm like, "Oh man." So then I go back and
and then you're wondering what he sees that you're not seeing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I'll make some tweaks and the things that I think maybe he's reacting to, and then I'll kick it back over to him. And he's like, "Yeah, that looks a lot better." And I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah.
Bill's a little more straightforward. So I like that.
I mean, yeah, and artists get to trust you more as you work with them more. Like Brian Hitch and I had much longer conversations on those first 4, 5, 6 issues of Ultimates than we did later on with, say, Fantastic Four or America's Got Powers, things like that. These last 2 covers I did for him, we didn't have a whole lot of communication. He sent them to me. He seemed happy with what was going on with them. So, I think you get a working relationship. You kind of know what each other is going to do. I know what Amanda's looking for on her stuff. I know what Brian's looking for in his stuff, and I knew what Steve was looking for in his stuff. Steve Rude hated ugly color, like lime greens. Hated lime greens. I knew never to use lime greens on his stuff. He always had a theory. It's like nothing should ever be ugly to look at, even if it's like a villain or an ugly scene. You have to color it with pretty colors because it should never be unpleasant to the human eye. But you have to make it look evil without making it look ugly, which is always a challenge. And I didn't quite get what he meant the first time he told me that, but the more I worked with him, I understood it more.
Yeah. Well, I have a note here. Like, I have questions. And one of the things I says is, what difficulties do you have in the process? And the note under it is Paul, Children of the Atom. So, I mean, and we don't have to get into that, but I do. I want to tilt away from that. And so Tamara, Sophie has a question, and she wants to know what your favorite Friday the 13th movie is. So we're going to entertain her, and then I have another question for you.
Right. So real quick, it's 4 because it's just you got Corey Feldman, you got Crispin Glover acting weird. It's great.
So my question is kind of how do you approach a cover? And I'd like Tony to kind of follow up after this. How do you approach the job of doing a cover versus interior pages? Is it something that you mentally change your mind or mindset for? Is it just another splash page? Is there something different that you approach it with?
Not really. I mean, I just always, obviously you want it to be punchier or something if it's a cover, but not particularly. And I'm always trying to key off of like what the artist has done anyway. So I'm really just kind of like trying to enhance what they've done and just kind of go with it, which is what I do on interior pages as well. But no, I wouldn't say particularly just like, yeah, like I said, like maybe you want it to look a little more exciting than you would just a random page or something. But
go ahead, Tony.
We had, when I was at DC Comics, because a lot of comics were still being sold on spinner racks back then. DC always wanted the logo and the background different colored from one issue to the next, just to make it very clear that this was a different issue that has been then, was on sale a week or two before. So
now I know you colored a lot of covers.
After 1981, when I left staff, the covers were split evenly between Tatiana Wood and myself.
I was going to bring her in, and I'm glad
Tatiana,
you are.
Tatiana, who was Wally Wood's ex-wife.
Which she is 96 years old.
Right, and she's still alive.
And she is still kicking. The quote I got from Mike Gold yesterday was, "She is one of the few people in this world he would still take a bullet for if he could get in front of it." So.
But Tatiana generally did the war, the horror mystery, and the Western covers. And I generally did the superheroes.
Okay.
There was some alternates. I mean, I did GI Combat. When I was coloring action, the covers for Superman, she was coloring action and vice versa. But but basically, the cover coloring is that, is there to sell the book and to grab the reader and to stand out, from hopefully the other comics. I mean, to talk about paperbacks, if you remember my late friend Jimmy Bama's Doc Savage covers for the paperbacks in the 60s, where he would use contrasting, generally two monochromatic colors contrasting to each other. They look, nothing like anything else on the stands, and your eye would just pass by all the other paperbacks around it and see Jimmy Bama's Doc Savage covers. That's the job of the cover colorist, to really do more of a kind of poster coloring.
Cool. I want to kind of bring in this piece here. So this piece this is Tatiana's colors on an 80s question.
Yes.
Right. And then I'll take this out and we'll go back. We'll find this other one. And then we have.
By the way,
this
should
one.
I tilt my my iPhone sideways? Or I notice everyone else is horizontal and I'm vertical.
Well, if you want to and it works, it makes you feel happy, that's fine. Otherwise, you're fine. You look great. And then there's this other person who did a newer question. So it's very interesting, like the muted effect that time has given us.
Well, I think today, you kind of expect someone to continue buying the series, as completists, no matter what the cover looks like. Whereas back then, when you still had, mom and pop shops and newsstands and such. I mean, I came into the business at the tail end of it being still a mass medium as opposed to a niche medium.
Sure.
And when there were, still comic books selling, a couple 100,000 copies an issue.
Tony, I'm gonna pull you out for a second because then you'll come in right. So just give me 1 second.
I will say it's kind of interesting. When I started on Immortal Hulk a few years back, the other Tom Brevoort and I had a conversation. One of the things that they wanted to do with Immortal Hulk was to have that same Tatiana Wood palette that she used in Swamp Thing and some of the other horror comics at the time, and it's still influential even to this day, what she was doing on some of those books, both in the covers and the interiors.
Oh, Tatiana did some magnificent work.
Oh yeah, just brilliant.
And she was brought in by Joe Orlando, who of course had, been a close friend of Wally's.
And he had all the horror books, right?
EC days, yes. But Jack Adler, I'll just mention, generally only gave the horror titles to the people he considered the best colorists because of the mood necessary and such. Adrian, it was unusual. Adrian's third book she got was to color on her own. She had been assisting me before. Was Doorway into Nightmare #2, drawn by Vincente Alcazar.
Wow.
And she brought it in and showed it to Jack, and Jack looked at it and then sent her to show it to the editor. Then he called me into his office and said, shut the door. And he said, Adrian's going to be the best colorist we have. So better than you, better than Tatiana, better than anyone.
Wow.
Yeah.
And that was her third job. Now, she had been an art student. She had made her own stop-action animated film and directed a student remake of the then-lost 1910 Edison Frankenstein film. And she was a fan. She'd gone to the Stan Lee night at Carnegie Hall before I ever moved to New York.
Wow.
So, she was a fangirl, but she immediately understood how to focus the attention, how to build the drama, how to use color for mood. And she learned some from me early on, and I could never have colored the Shadow Strikes, for example, or done the job I did on the Phantom without, having worked on her in the Batman books and learned from her.
That's fantastic.
Now, how many issues of Batman did she do in a row? She did like an enormous.
She did 191 issues of Batman. She missed a few. She missed Batman Year One, which I think Dave Mazzucchelli's wife, Richmond Lewis, colored.
Yes, yeah.
But she did 191 issues of Batman and 202 issues of Detective, by my count.
That's amazing.
And she also did Raven the Bold, Batman and the Outsiders, Robin, Shadow of the Bat. For about 17 years, with the exception of the Legend of the Dark Knight book, she colored like everything of Batman.
Yeah.
And we'll never see a run like that again.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And
it's a great
I colored
question.
200 issues of Green Lantern, counting also the Action Comics Weekly. And of course, her other big assignments were New Teen Titans and Mike Grell's Warlord.
Oh.
Which she started coloring Warlord with number 11 or 13 or somewhere around then. But those were pretty much our best-selling books, the Batman books and New Teen Titans and Warlord.
Right.
So Nick makes this point, and I kind of agree with it. There's always this conversation, and I don't want to get too deep in it, but there's always this conversation like, who's your Batman artist? Like, who's the person stuff? Like, Adrian Roy is everybody's Batman artist. Like that's the thing, like, because she made the transition. So as the pencilers changed, it still was Batman.
She lasted
that doesn't happen.
6 Batman editors.
Wow.
Where every year or two the pencilers and the writers would change, and every few years the editors would change. But she started out with Julie Schwartz, and then went through Al Milgrom. Co-edited Detective Comics for a while, and then Paul Levitz, Dick Giordano, Len Wein, and Denny O'Neil. And when she was taken off the Batman books, it was not Denny O'Neil's choice. He was overruled by the new color editor. But and that broke her heart, losing the Batman books. So
I want to want to kind of talk about something, and Chris, this is something that I want you to chime in on, but I also want to bring this to Marissa and Tamara. As you interact with people, what is the thing that people should know but don't know about comic book coloring?
I mean, it's storytelling. It's just another part of the storytelling. I think a lot of people get hung up on, how pretty something is, or all the effects and the lighting and stuff, but it's really just storytelling, like even Paul and I were talking about before. There's a lot more to it than just being able to make stuff look pretty. It's got to be able to evoke mood, and you have to be able to pace your story with it, and it's just a lot more intricate than people see on the surface.
I think one of the things about coloring is when it works well, it can look so effortless and it blends perfectly with the art. And so it's one of those things where it should be like the air you breathe, where you shouldn't even notice it until it's pointed out. And then you're like, oh, really glad I have this. But usually once people realize that it's its own thing, or how the art works differently with certain colorists, I think their eyes very much open. But it's a hard thing to see without being told.
Yeah, and there is a theory, of course, that if people are stopping to look at how nicely rendered something is or how pretty something is, you're not doing your job, because you're taking the reader out of the story. Then you want them to not necessarily notice the coloring. It should work on a subconscious level almost to evoke mood or to tell the story. So it's not a bad thing that they don't notice what we're doing sometimes.
Yeah,
but we don't get any respect. So
yeah, kind of, I guess, keying off that of like what they don't know is because of that, and if you're doing it well, they often don't realize what you're bringing to the table a lot of the time. I mean, not that I've done this in a while, but if you've ever read like reviews and they'll talk about the art, it's like they're clearly talking about a coloring thing that's happened, but they don't realize it. Not all the time, but you see that as a recurring thing. So a lot of people really don't seem to understand that, even if they kind of understand the art side of things.
Yeah, I stopped reading reviews.
Oh, a long time ago, but yeah.
You can read mine.
Yeah, yours I can read.
If anyone wants to see sort of the effects of this, Rico Renzi runs Color Jams on Twitter now, and you can see established colorists and amateur colorists all doing the same pages, and it's really beautiful way to see how the color affects the art and all the different kinds of choices a person could be making. I think that's one of the most vital and interesting things.
How many pages a week does a colorist generally do these days, since you have to do the separations at the same time?
All of them. No, I'm sorry. I mean, for me, I don't know. Maybe for you all, it's different. It depends on the week, obviously. But for me, I'm clocking between 20 and 30 pages a week.
That many with the separations at the same time.
Right. Yeah, well, that's on average. I'm averaging.
Yeah.
I don't want to say what my high and my low is. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say it comes out to about a book a week, 20 to 25 pages, something like that would probably be a good work week.
Yeah.
But there's also weeks when you do 40 and weeks where you do 5. So
yeah.
Children of the Atom.
Yeah. You really want to go into that, don't you?
No.
Sounds like it might be good to talk about.
No, okay. I had something kind of on the side, and I'm going to bring this in. Let me take this out.
Can I ask Anthony real quick? Anthony,
I'll get this ready.
When you were running, when you're doing color guides, how many pages were you and Adrian, let's say, banging through every week?
Each week was generally at least, I would do 5 covers, and between the two of us, we would generally do 100 interior pages. But there were weeks when we did 165 interior pages. Those would be nights when we had a lot of 4-hour nights of sleep.
Right.
But Generally we would do at least 5 books a week between the two of us.
Okay.
And then, as I said, about 5 covers a week.
How heavily did you code those? Did you write code numbers in for like everything on every page, or did you?
Yes, because you wanted to protect yourself from the separators.
Yeah.
And back then, the separators were generally not artists; they were housewives.
Yeah.
Working at World Color in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and they had like 9 animation cell overlays,
Right. Cutting ruby
acetate cells basically.
Right.
And they would just paint this red gunk, red opaque gunk, a solid value, and then they would be photographed in the exposure time and the halftone. They had the same halftone screen, but the exposure time would dictate whether it was 25%, 50%, or 100%.
Right.
One of the problems that also happened around that time is actually in the late 60s, World Color got new cameras. And a quick question here. What determines, well, I'll give the answer. It's not so much the size of the dot that directly determines the darkness on the page as the amount of the white that shows through. Chemical got new cameras, which the red and blue plates, the dot patterns were on the same angle instead of diagonally to each other.
Oh.
And so they could line up with the red and blue dots printing on top of each other, or, possibly alongside at such an angle that virtually no white was showing through. So the pages could change drastically. The color tones for the same thing could be drastically different from one page to the next.
That answers a question that has been going around the internet for a while, which is why sometimes brown skins in comics would turn green when there was when like in newspapers people could still print brown nicely.
Well,
And the dots lining up makes a lot more sense than some of the theories that I've heard.
Well, Marvel, of course, generally did black skin tones in its early days when they started having black police officers, or just having some black characters in the background. For a while, used like the same gray tone as the Hulk had in the first issue, which was basically the 25 yellow, 25 red, 50% blue that Batman's gray on his outfit was.
All right, now
so
I have a question. Hang on, Tony. So
if the yellow printed dark, you could get a greenish tone also. So
can you guys tell? Do you guys know? The codes for colors, the way that he knows the percentages of colors.
Yeah, pretty good.
Adrian
and I
know
like the 5-digit numbers. You know which one is what?
Yeah.
I started out doing the codes using the old charts and everything, and that's why I was asking about how heavily they coded stuff. 'Cause that's what always slowed me down, was writing in the numbers. I know them instantly looking at them. I can look at a color and tell exactly the percentages looking at them, but writing all those codes in those pages, I can't even imagine doing 100, 150 pages a week doing that.
Well, Adrian, I generally did the coding, and Adrian and I really never put down a color without knowing what we intended it to be. Mm-hmm. But in the early days of our coloring, when she was the only freelancer at DC with her own desk, we would walk home. We were living in Manhattan, and we'd walk home after work and point out areas of walls or clouds or sunsets, and ask the other to challenge the other to do the color callouts or the percents.
Right.
Yeah.
But I had done separations, and hand separations. So, it was much more analytical in that we had a very limited palette. So it was pretty easy to know what we'd put down, because if it wasn't something that was easily transferable into 25, 50, and 100% values, we shouldn't have put it down in the first place.
Right. I would like to just really quickly speak to when you're talking about the black people's skin turning green. and I'm sure Chris has probably had experience with this too. A lot of it has to do with the way your Photoshop ink settings. A lot of colors color in RGB. They don't have their Photoshop separation setups done correctly. So when yellows, oranges, browns get transferred to CMYK for printing, a lot of K-tones start seeping into that, and that's what turns the yellows and stuff green.
Yeah.
In modern printing, you see that
when
a
you
lot.
Do your coloring, you do it CMYK from the start.
Right. I tend to work. I mean, I work the file in RGB, but I work with CMYK sliders, and I only work with CMYK percentages. And I'm really careful about how I set up the conversion from RGB to CMYK. And I know Chris, we've talked about that before. You teach that in your class.
Yeah.
Because if you just leave the standard Photoshop settings, which a lot of colorists coming to the market today do, because nobody's training a lot of that stuff anymore. Yeah, all the yellows and oranges and stuff will turn green. It's a common problem. You see it a lot.
Yeah. I talk about that in my class a lot. Actually, my next class next week, we're going to go into color theory, and that's when I point out to everyone that, if you have like an ivory black, if you're painting like in traditional media with an ivory black and a yellow, you're going to get green, and that's kind of what happens in Photoshop too sometimes.
By the way, anybody watching this should take Chris's classes.
I agree.
Thank you.
At any level, he's got several different levels, and they're all great.
Thank you.
My wife took his class, and I audited it. So,
yeah, I didn't have nearly the craziest time with coding when I was doing color guides as you all did. I mean, I was only doing about $3 a month when I was doing color guides. But I came in at a time doing guides when all we really had to code was special effects or anything in particular that we needed something to be a very specific color. Otherwise, it was mostly just matched by eye. I think the separators were a little bit better. It wasn't housewives cutting ruby lith. It was, like younger kids in front of a computer with the color guides up trying to match what we had done at that point. But yeah, color guides were fun because it's tactile, but coding is such a pain in the neck. Yeah.
So I want to bring this in. This is something I saw on Twitter actually last week, which was ironic and just because it was coming up. So Pat Brasso said that he noticed after all these years that he had lettered the name Hugh Jass as the colorist in this Doctor Strange backup, and it cracked him up. So
that was me. I did that one.
So, anybody fessing up to that? No. But so the question was, well, someone asked him, why was that? And it basically because the colorist, it was a rush job, and the colorist didn't want credit.
Right.
I've
done jobs like that.
You've done jobs like that?
Yeah. There's an issue of Thor floating around.
Does it say Chris Sotomayor, or does
no,
it just say,
it doesn't.
It says something else?
It doesn't say anything.
It just sits there. It doesn't say anything.
That's right. Yeah.
I worked under a pen name the first probably 3-4 years I was in comics. I was Signet Ash. And it's because I was the art director and editor at Now Comics, and I was penciling, inking, lettering, coloring, and doing a little bit of everything. So I didn't want, one name like for all these jobs. So I made up this Signet Ash character who was, the art director and editor and publisher, not publisher, but, living in the ivory tower, whipping the artists.
Why didn't I know that?
Paul, how come you chose to stick with coloring as the main thing?
Honestly, it started paying the bills better at that time. It was the mid 80s. I was living in Chicago. There was 2 small comic companies in Chicago, Now Comics and First Comics. And I'd done everything for Now Comics. I had done some inking on Dreadstar for First Comics, but nobody was really doing blue line coloring then other than Steve Olaf and trying to think of who else was doing it back then. I mean, that was even before Lynn Varley had gotten into it, or it was just about the time Lynn Varley was doing it. So, publishers were looking for somebody who could do blue line coloring, like painted color. And I happened to be in the right place at the right time and started getting lots of work coloring and just kind of stuck with it.
Just like Al Williamson ended up doing a lot of inking because he was a much faster inker than he was a penciler.
Sure.
John Workman mentioned that Murphy Anderson mentioned to him that until royalties came in, but basically through the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, that the people who made the best money in comics were the letterers and the colorists. People like Ben Oda, who lettered everything. And also, of course, a number of the letterers and colorists had staff jobs through the 60s and then could take like an unlimited amount of freelance and often had their wives helping them, on the freelance assignments and just would do tons of work. But Murphy Anderson said that, until really royalties came in, the best paid people in the business were the letterers and the colorists.
It's that volume.
How the times have changed.
Yeah.
All right. So Nick had this comment, and I'm going to put it up here, but we're not going to answer his question. And it says, "Let's get to real shit. If you could fight one penciler, who would it be?" So we're not going to talk about that because that's not very nice. But I do have a question. If you could fight someone to work with one penciler, who would be the penciler that you wanted to work with? And I want everybody to answer.
Oh, dead or alive?
Yeah, okay. If you want to go that way, sure.
Well, the dead artist is going to draw very well.
I mean, I can't say Dennis, right? Because I'm working with
you
Dennis.
can. I mean, you can. Is it Dennis? Is it Dennis?
It kind of is Dennis. It's kind of, yeah.
All right, so like for the people
exactly
who don't know, and since we have Chris on, and I haven't had him like live for this, so I want like everybody has their own weird story, and like I go to comic shows a lot, and I go to panels where like, how do you get into comics? And the answer is that everybody has their own story. So what does D'Agostino's produce department and Dennis Cowan have to do with Chris Sotomayor sitting in this computer right now?
It was me putting myself through art school, working at D'Agostino's on 23rd, 28th Street on the west side. And Dennis would come in, and I didn't want to, I knew who he was, from like Marvel Age magazine and the Comics Journal and all that stuff. You see photos of these people every once in a while. And Dennis had been coming in as a regular, and one time he came in, I accosted him and asked him about using assistants, and I told him I'm an artist, I'm putting myself through school, and he took pity on me and introduced me to someone who helped me make a lot of connections, and it all wound up with me being here. So that's a very condensed version of the story.
It's a good story. All right, so Nick, I should have had Nick on this, so we will make sure we get Nick for next year. But he has a question, and I want you guys to answer it. So it's towards Tamara and Marissa. What makes good modern coloring job to take? What do you look for? What is the job that you want to take? And I want you to answer that. But before we get to that, Tamara, why don't you give us your secret origin story? Like, how did you get into comics? We talked about a bunch of other people. So,
well, so like as far as first job, I also did flats to begin.
Sure.
Like early.
Who were you flatting for?
It was like mid 2000s. I did. Brian Haberlin had a studio, so I did a bunch of flats for them. And then I went to the Kubert school kind of simultaneously, and it's a lot easier to just get a job as coloring. Because I also went there like studying art and everything. But you're surrounded by students who are also trying to do that. So then they'll be like, "Oh, hey, you colored pretty well. Like, why don't you color my thing?" And then you meet new writers, and then just like it's easier to branch out because you're meeting like all these different people as you work on a new project. And then after a while, it's just like the ball was rolling, and it's like, well, it's easier to just keep coloring. like people are like, I'm starting to get more things without even like trying as much as I would with other stuff. So it just kind of like came about that way. I went to like conventions when I still lived, because I stayed up in New Jersey after I graduated. And I go to Comic Con.
I went to when I went to high school, my dad's house was like up on the other side of the hill from the Kubert school. So,
okay. In Dover?
I was in Randolph, so.
Oh yeah. I lived there.
The Mandrakes kids went to my high school. After me.
Yeah, just mostly from that, like just like connections going through that. I got a few jobs, just like going to conventions and talking to editors, like smaller companies, and getting some starting jobs that way too.
So what is it? What is it you look for in a job? Is there jobs that you look for particularly?
I don't know. It's like either it has a good page rate, or like I like the art. Like the
Money
ideal
is the determining factor.
Right. I mean,
This is a business, yeah.
That's a baseline.
Yeah.
That's a baseline, obviously. But like, if it pays well, I like the art. I like the thing that they're doing, like the actual book. See, Sophie gets it. It's
So
nice
what about like Once in Future, right?
Once in Future? I mean, yeah. It's
when that was approached to you, did you have to think about it? Or was the page rate just so fantastic?
Yeah, I mean, it's like Kieran Gillen's writing, and Dan, like he's newer at that point, Dan Moira.
Sure.
He's great. Like even then, he's like amazing. And I've got a decent page rating, so like all of the things were there. It's like, yeah, I'm really happy to have done that, and it's great because another thing I like for taking on jobs is maybe I've worked with the people before, so like now I work with Dan a lot, or I try to, when the chance comes up, and if there's any chance I get to work with Dan, I want to work with Dan because I know that we both enjoy working with each other. We click, and he's really good.
Keeps getting better.
Yeah, he's incredibly fast too. Somehow he's drawing like 3 books right now, I think.
Wow, nice.
That's insane.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't keep up with him coloring him.
Wow.
But yeah, those are the main things I look for. I mean, I feel like fairly established now that I don't have to like find like, oh, this will give me like enough attention or this. It's more like where my interest is, and if it's like a baseline of being able to support myself. If stuff has back end, even better. But
So Marissa, what's your stuff on that?
I have a problem because I like money, but I also like being a little freak more. So I tend to look for stuff where I can be a weirdo, and that's why you have Grumble. That's why you have Black Manta. That's why I have stuff within New York City school system. It pays terribly, but I'm proud of the work because we're doing good advocacy work and because I get to be a weirdo. So, I'm not, in some respects, I try to be a very ruthless business person, but I'm not very good at it. So that's why you always hear me talking about it, is because it's me hyping myself up to be like, take better page rates, follow up on billing,
It's you spend too many hours sitting in front of a computer to work on stuff that you're not interested though. I mean, I love superheroes, but I lost interest a long time ago in spending hour after hour coloring little action figures hitting each other for 22 pages. I remember when Marie Javins called me up, and they're going to do this Snagglepuss book at DC, and she says, "Would you be interested in coloring something weird? It's about a gay pink lion in the 50s, and he's kind of like a Tennessee Williams character." It's like, well, that sounds great.
First of all, if anybody has not read that book, if anybody's listening, you need to go find Exit Stage Left, the Snagglepuss Chronicles, written by Mark Russell, colored by Paul Mounts, and I forget who the art was, but it is required reading.
It won the GLAAD Award for Comic of the Year because Mark Russell's writing on this, just exploring like gay theater culture using these Hanna-Barbera characters was it was just brilliant.
Oh my god! And you did a fantastic job on it. It was brilliant. And it broke Mark Russell because he didn't win another award until this year. So that was but absolutely, that's fantastic. Like that's the kind of thing. Like it's one of the cool parts about comics today in that there are so many more genres and so many more opportunities to do different kinds of stories. Is that something like Chris, as you and Paul, because you've kind of grown from where it's just superheroes into doing the other things? Like Chris, you've done Happy Hill recently, and you've done some other things that are not superheroes, but like you started out doing superheroes, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, got into comics because I loved superheroes, but yeah, like Paul said, got to take a break.
Yeah.
You got to, make it interesting and keep it fun. And, if that means stepping off of superheroes, like I'm doing Dudley Dotson right now, and doing another book with Koi Pham called Absolved, which is a little more John Wicky. And
Nice.
It's fun to stretch those non-superhero legs sometimes.
Yeah. And you're changing, and it's not just not superhero, but you're changing your palette, you're changing your storytelling methods. You're going to color a John Wick type book a lot different than you're going to color a Captain America story or something like that. It's a completely different palette, completely different approach, completely different rendering style.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So, and let's talk about kind of how this works, in the way comics have changed. Tony, how in depth were the editors going over your color guides? Like, did they look at your color guides before, and did they come back and make you do changes?
Depends on the editor. Paul Levitz and Len Wein, really understood coloring. Of course, Len was married to Glynis Wein, who was one of the top colorists in the business. I remember times I did my first Superman cover. I brought into Julie Schwartz and to approve, and he looked at it and said, and I really worked to unify the colors and not throw colors around, and I really was proud of this. And Julie said, "There's no green on this cover." And I really worked to have it in the red brown so that Superman's blue would stand out. But my favorite editor actually to work with in many ways was Dick Giordano, because Dick had, of course, started out at Charlton. And since Charlton paid, like $4 or $5 a page for writing and $20 for finished art, pencils and inks, I think he had, as editor, had realized that you couldn't give an artist $50 of grief over a page he was getting paid $20 for. And even though the rates were much better at DC, Dick always respected the creativity of the people he worked with. And I remember bringing in some covers that Dick had drawn, and Dick would look at them and say, "Gee, this is totally 180 degrees away from how I imagined it when I drew it. But it's at least as good as what I had in mind, and you're a creative person too and entitled to your creativity," and he'd initial it and sign it. Now, not if, if a cover needed something to improve, but he was an editor who wouldn't just ask for corrections just for the sake of feeling he needed to ask for something as editor. But I think the editors by the late 70s and 80s and 90s were a lot more, they were a lot more aware of the colorists. They, when I was color coordinator at DC for 5.5 years, one of my biggest jobs was telling the editors that they couldn't have Adrian on all of their books, except Paul Levitz, who got her on all 4 of the books he was editing, and later Dick Giordano. But there were a lot of requests for Adrian. By the way, quick to mention a colorist who's hasn't been mentioned that much, but who just died this last year. Who was a comic colorist who was probably the most read comic colorist of all time?
I don't know.
Oh, I need help on
that. I would have said Marie Severin, but
I would say Gene D'Angelo.
Oh,
because not only did he color a number of the top books at DC, like some of the Superman titles and such, but he was the staff colorist at King Features for over 40 years, coloring Blondie, Beetle Bailey, Hagar the Horrible, High and Lois. So probably those top humor strips probably had 100 million readers every Sunday.
Yeah.
Worldwide. And he moonlighted at DC, but I just wanted to give a little call out to Gene because he just died a year ago at age 97 in his own house in his own bed.
Wow.
And but no, it's the editors, in the 80s, I think, and 90s especially, were much more demanding about what they wanted in coloring. And for a while, that was when Image came around. I thought there was some very bad coloring at Image, was just throwing around colors indiscriminately. And some of the younger editors started asking for coloring like that because, that's what was selling. I think the reason the books were selling is because they were drawn by hot creators and low numbers 1, number 2, number 3 of hot books.
Sure.
But
so for Marissa, Tamara, Chris, and Paul, how often do you get pushback from editors, or have you, on what you've done and say, no, I need this to be different, or I don't like this way this is? Do you get that?
It depends on the editor, of course.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, we don't need to name names.
No, that's fine. I won't. I promise.
I was going to, but
it was Mike Gold. He was the one.
I find that newer editors who are brand new on the job and don't really understand, or editors that don't really understand color and what it's supposed to do, they feel the need to put their thumbprint on everything just so that that they saw every page, and they don't really understand how lighting works and how mood works and basic storytelling aspects. So that gets a little frustrating at times. And for those editors, I'd rather either not work with them or maybe just do covers or maybe short stories, but long form stuff is it's way too stressful.
Yeah.
So I don't get a lot of pushback from, many editors, but there are like some newer editors around that really don't get it, unfortunately.
You have to whip them into shape. You have to. Yeah.
I know that I'm supposed to teach them how to treat me, I guess. But
no,
it's difficult.
It's true, and some of the best editors are ones who were trained, who have been there a long time. If Tom Brevoort makes a change on a cover, he's making it for a real reason, a storytelling reason, a sales reason,
right?
Something. Tom doesn't ask for indiscriminate changes on things.
Right.
I've had editors who are, brand new assistant editors, 19, 20, 22 years old. Not necessarily Marvel and DC, but some of the smaller companies who, like Anthony Tolan was saying, that they'll give you $100 of grief for a $50 cover or something.
Right.
Something that maybe you agreed to do just because, that sounds like a fun project, even though it doesn't pay anything. And then, especially licensed stuff, boy, you'll get changes on that constantly.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to put their thumbprint and have that blue pencil fever on the licensed stuff.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think if an editor's note doesn't make the thing better, then don't give the note.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely had that. That's how it's my experience too. Like, it's not most people, but you get it sometimes on editors, and it was more, I'd say, starting out when you were getting paid nothing, that people were way more demanding.
Yeah.
And then licensed stuff. But that is like very hit or miss. I've had licensed stuff that's super easy, and I've had licensed stuff that just made me want to quit. It's just miserable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, less so now that I'm more established and now that people sort of know what my vibe is. But when I was starting out, it was a lot of doing very low pay work with just tons of edits and no clear upfront communication. Like, I have people I work with that we do a lot of back and forth, but usually they'll tell me ahead of time that's the plan, and so I can schedule for that and like not be surprised and frustrated. And like I think one of the things that's really important is having a sense of trust. You know, like I'm doing a thing with Dave Marquez right now, and like sometimes we'll really dig in and do a couple rounds of edits to make the idea really clear and really stick. But we have clear enough communication and it makes the end product better. So I have total trust in it, like in the notes. It doesn't make me feel frustrated. It makes me feel good. And like honestly now I'm trying to quit jobs when I'm getting notes and they're making me feel bad. Like I think that's just like a way of yourself telling yourself like this is not a good fit. So get out of it.
Yeah.
Soul crushing, yeah.
Yeah, notes should feel good. That's my statement.
Comics, it should be fun.
Yeah, I mean, again, we spend way too many hours sitting in a solitary room in front of a computer, or a paint set, an easel, whatever it might be, to not have some enjoyment out of it. Otherwise, work in a supermarket, right? Work in D'Agostino's, or the coffee shop. You can meet famous colorists that way, I hear.
Tony, I've muted you because we're hearing your the stream on your speaker.
Okay, hang on.
Like it seems like you might have another. Okay. You're watching it somewhere else because we're hearing the sound. And I would love to continue on, but I get very distracted. So I'm going to put you back on mute for a second.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, that's a lot better. Perfect. Yeah, that's great. Can you hear us? I don't think you can hear us, man. Oh. We'll figure this out. But we're like well into our second hour here. And I want to, I do have something kind of set up here because I did find when I was preparing that every colorist's favorite character has got to be this. Right?
I am.
Come on. Tony, are you there? Can you hear us?
Did we lose Tony?
I don't think he can hear us. I don't know why.
He muted us.
He muted us. Well, I think he muted us down here because he's listening to us up there. But so I wish you could hear us because like this is the perfect colorist superhero, right? All he does is change colors. That's it.
I worked on a character called Rainbow Boy. It was kind of the same concept.
You did a character called what? Rainbow Boy? Hang on.
Rainbow Boy. It was actually an old character from the 40s.
Would it be this?
Yeah, it might be.
It might be this right here. This would be Rainbow. Because not only are you Amanda Connor's personal colorist, you are also Sean Von Gorman's personal colorist.
Yeah. Not on everything, but on a lot of things. Yeah, I really like working with him. And again, work on really interesting books. It's like, LGBTQ charity books. This was for the Pulse nightclub shooting, I believe we did this story for.
This was in Love is Love. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Yeah, and we did one for AOC, and just really he gets involved in really cool projects. So.
Yeah, well, I want everybody to know the best part about this is that this character's ability is that he shoots pinballs out of his butt. So who doesn't love that on Colorist Appreciation Day?
There's a lot of knockouts.
I can't believe you had that ready to pull up.
Well, I was talking to Sean last night. All right, Tony said something, and I don't know what it was.
He says his sound is ready, but I can hear him, so maybe he can hear us now.
Can you hear us, Tony? We can hear you. Off. Back on. He'll probably come back. We'll figure that out. He has left the chat. He will be back. I believe. So, let's see if we can get this. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's go on. So, Color Boy or Color Kid, how did did you have any experience working with Color Kid?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you. Yeah.
Did I have any experience at what?
With Color Kid?
Show the picture again.
Yeah, let me get it back too. The sub.
I only colored. I think I colored that Who's Who page, but I generally.
This is the Who's Who's page. Did you color
right,
this
I know.
page?
I'm saying, but I generally only colored the Legion covers.
Right.
Outside
Did you
of
cover
a
the
couple
subs
stories
cover?
in the 70s.
Did you color the
During my
subs
time
cover?
on the Legion, Carl Gafford, who was my former roommate, and my predecessor as DC's assistant production manager and color coordinator, was coloring the Legion, and I just did the covers.
Okay. I have a since his name has come up a bunch of times, I have this awesome trivia question that I love to share with people. And Chris, I might have told you this, and
Okay.
Tony, you know this, but does anybody know who Jack Adler's nephew is?
Oh. I'm sure Paul knows this.
So Jack Adler, who Tony was mentioning, who created the color separating process, his nephew is Howard Stern.
Actually, his first cousin is Howard Stern.
First cousin. Okay, well, then I will yell at Mike.
They were first cousins, and Howard did a wonderful half-hour tribute to Jack when Jack died. But the reason Howard Stern was always a DC fan instead of a Marvel fan is that his favorite cousin, Jack, would bring him the free DC comics. But no, they're first cousins. Funny story. Howard went as Jack's guest to one of the National Cartoonist Society banquets. And Frank Thorne's wife, who's was very active in her church and pretty prissy, compared to. But I was at one of John Workman's 4th of July parties, and Frank's wife was just talking about what a nice, polite young man Jack's cousin was. And then she turned to Frank Thorne and said, "What was his name again?" And Frank said, "Howard Stern." And she had no idea who Howard Stern was. But when he didn't have a mic or a camera in front of him, he was a nice Jewish boy.
That's funny.
So I'm gonna throw this one around the table too. I know this is hard to do, and I know this is a question that artists don't like to hear because it has to do with your process and your evolution. Is there a piece of work that you've done to date that you are most proud of? Or could you decide that?
Is it a matter of deciding, or is it a matter of
like you may not have thought of it. You may not have had this question in your head. You may need to think about it for a second.
My next one.
Yeah. Paul's got it. My next one.
I'm generally proudest of my work on the Shadow Strikes.
Really?
Just because it allowed me to do a lot of the dark, moody coloring. As I said, I was trying to go for a rotogravure look. I also really liked coloring Ambush Bug. And I'm really proud of some of the work I did at Disney Comics. I was a regular colorist on Mickey Mouse, and very proud of the Phantom Blot bedtime story.
I have to say the Shadow Strike stuff influenced me greatly. I just pored over those books and studied the coloring on those books. So,
and I was also so inspired because, especially on the early issues, Eduardo Barreto is such an underrated artist.
Yeah,
he could draw anything, and I mean, there are artists. Many of the artists who can draw Superman are not particularly good on Batman, and vice versa. And Eduardo Barreto was a Superman artist and a Batman artist and a Western artist and a war artist. course, the last thing he was doing before he died was he was the artist on the Sunday Phantom newspaper strip. But
he also did the best Batman and Superman comic, which was
when Garcia Lopez got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was saying he did the best Batman and Superman at the same time, which was Speeding Bullets.
Oh. Yeah, he when Garcia Lopez got too busy to do licensing for DC, or they had too much, Eduardo Barreto would come in and he would do these amazing like turnarounds and toy designs and licensing. He could do any character. It was incredible.
He died at age 57, the same age Adrian was when she died. In fact, he died exactly a year after her. But Eduardo's passing, I think, got ignored by the comics community to some degree because he died the day after Joe Simon.
Oh.
So everyone was paying attention to Joe Simon's death.
Wow.
But Eduardo was just a solid artist, a great storyteller. And as I said, I really consider The Shadow Strikes, which was the first book I think that he did where he inked himself, at least the first American comic book. He just knocked it out of the park and did some of the best work of his career.
All right, Tony's Brave. Anybody else got a favorite?
Tamara?
Yeah, I'd say I generally agree with like the next thing, but there is a book I really liked with Johnny Christmas when I used to we did a big graphic novel for Image, Firebug, because I got to approach it differently. Usually I have a very like delineated process with layers and stuff, but with him I wanted to do like I still did it digitally, but like kind of approach it more like a watercolor. I'm building up the color and I'm kind of more freely painting it. But I did it with him because it's like it was just, he was the writer and the artist. There's no editor, so I know I've worked with him. I know that like, okay, working like that is very difficult if you have to make substantive changes. So it's like, I know you, I know that we can do this and get through it. And I show him like roughs sometimes if it was like a trickier one, which I normally don't do like color roughs, but for that I would sometimes. And it was like this big book, and I like the way it works. And sometimes I'd like to work that way, but it has to be someone who has a very particular art style, and that sort of working relationship comes up again. So it hasn't since, but it's one of the things I'm more proud of.
I think a lot of us look back at old work and we like say, what book would we do that we wish we could do over? Because we look at it now and we just go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of job security in coloring anymore like Adrian and I had when we were under contract at DC for 3 years at a time? And, we would get the work guaranteed. We would get a 4-week vacation bonus at the end of the year. We'd get free medical insurance.
No.
No way. It doesn't exist anymore. I mean, you can get close to
made it a lot easier to get a mortgage on a house when you could show a contract that showed what you would be making for the next 3 years.
They might like DC will send me stuff for like the next 5 issues or something and contract that way, but you don't have like a contract of guaranteed work with them. Certainly no benefits of any kind.
Yeah, unless you sign an exclusive, which is very very rare.
So how many?
Right. That's what I was talking about. We were both under exclusive contract.
Yeah. I was offered exclusives at Marvel 3 times back in the 90s, but the offer was just terrible. There was no signing bonus. They couldn't give me health insurance because I didn't live in a state that their company operated in. So it's like, well, we can give you a stipend of like $100 a month, which doesn't buy health insurance for a freelancer. The deal was just, it wasn't great. And they'd guarantee you a certain amount of work. But if you got to like October, November, and they hadn't fulfilled like 80% of it, then you could start looking for other work, but you couldn't look for other work until they decided they weren't going to fulfill the contract. I mean, it was just terribly worded deals. So
you never did it?
Yeah, so I never did it.
I signed.
It wasn't worth giving up other work opportunities to lock myself into that, honestly. And getting a home mortgage was really tricky as a freelancer.
Well, Adrian and I were under like 3-year contracts for about 15 years.
Wow.
And as I said, at the end of the year, they would divide what we had made for the year, which would be more than our guarantee, and divide it by 13, and we got that as a 4-week vacation bonus.
Nice.
And as I said, medical insurance was free.
Back in time.
And Paul Levitz and Jeanette Kahn did a lot treat freelancers a lot better than they've been treated in the past.
So, Chris, did you sign a contract with Marvel?
I did for a year back in, I want to say 2006 or 7 or something.
Is that
like
the year
that.
that you worked yourself into the hospital?
No, that was. We're gonna do that.
I'm
Yeah.
just saying. I don't know. Like, was it harder working for them directly? Where you were exclusive.
The reason why I signed an exclusive was that so I wouldn't have to work so hard that I'd wind up in the hospital again.
Okay.
Right. But that was during Planet Hulk. That's the book I
Okay.
did while I was exclusive.
Yeah.
That was good stuff. That was really good stuff.
Thanks. I it's one of those books where I look at some of those pages and I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that over again. But like everything from the first like decade of my career, I wish I could do over again.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Have any of you had a book that just totally exhausted you the way Crisis on Infinite Earths did for me?
Probably not.
And by the way, Crisis of Infinite Earth paid straight rate. Not even a Baxter rate, no bonus.
Okay, well, did George get straight rate?
George and the writer and the inkers got royalties.
Okay.
Which colorists did not get back then.
No.
Right.
But the pages took more than twice as long as any other page.
Yeah.
Sure.
And
because they're like tiny little dots, just like this dot of little blue, because the character's only like this big.
And I got the book because I knew just about every character anyway, just by memory.
Mm-hmm.
But
I
also had a complete Julie Schwartz superhero collection up in my attic, going back to Showcase 4 back then.
Nice.
Was there ever a time when you did something like that where there was like so many different, characters or things in there where something came back different than what you thought it was supposed to come back, like color-wise?
Not really. It's occasional little separation mistakes.
Separation, sure. But there are certain
really.
Things.
We generally tried, with a limited palette to safeguard ourselves as much as possible.
It happened a lot with blue line coloring because you were so at the mercy of whoever was going to put those pages on a drum scanner.
Yeah.
And the color part of it was scanned separately from the line art part of it.
Right.
And the paper was a little bit thicker that you colored on than the acetate for the black line. So there'd be registration problems. Again, we were talking about yellows turning green, and the Adventures of Captain America book that I worked on, I still just cringe every time I see a copy of it because it just does not look anything like the original hand-painted pages.
Did you dry mount back then? Were the blue lines dry mounted to a heavier piece of illustration board? We would do it and make sure it had the exact same seconds and the number of seconds in the dry mount press.
Yeah, sometimes they would come. It depends. There weren't a lot of standards, and they would get the stuff from the service bureau. So sometimes it would be a solid piece of illustration board with a peelable surface, a cold press or a hot press peelable surface. Sometimes it would just be a piece of Bristol board that they would print the blue lines on. Sometimes it would be an illustration board that you have to peel the surface. There was no, that was part of the problem. There was no standards in what they were using. I mean, Marvel didn't have a service bureau. I set them up with a service bureau in Chicago that was doing all the drum scanning at the time because they had experience with the companies in Chicago. But
Jack Adler and Saul Harrison at DC had both, of course, worked in the engraving plants, and Saul and Jack had both worked on Action Comics #1. And Saul had worked on Famous Funnies #1 back in 1934. Wow. So, but I mean, they had worked in engraving plants, so they knew the system, inside and out, and knew how to protect themselves in many ways. Some of the little things that Jack knew, for example, if you look at Superman versus Spider-Man. You will note, especially when there are big panels, and to go for more of a 3D effect, that there is maybe a 1/16 of an inch halo, white halo around Superman or Spider-Man to differentiate them from the background and give more of a 3D look. And Jack Adler and I stood in the white counter in production, painting, a 1/16 of an inch white halo around the characters on the original art and on the color guide.
See, I always wondered how they pulled that off. If it had to be hand done, or say it had to be hand done at the time, and I never could figure out like how tricky that must have been to pull off with that coloring system.
Right, hand done by me and Jack. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But well, I think DC paid extra for better color steps on that book.
Yeah.
That was such a prestigious book, but those were the little tricks. And it was really, as I said, Saul and Jack had been in the business since the very beginning. Jack had done separations on Prince Valley and Sunday Pages in 37 and 38. And so they just, I was really, really lucky to be able to learn from them. And
one of the things, talking about Blue Line, like I recently, earlier this year, there was a art installation at a college near here where they were doing an art installation for Breathtaker. I don't know if, Paul, do you remember Breathtaker?
Breathtaker?
It was a pretty sure that's the name. Mark Wheatley and Mark Hempel book. It was one of the first, and like Mark, basically what they did was that Mark Hempel did the line art, and then Wheatley painted the colors into it. So like they did a whole presentation with the black, with the acetate and the blue line out there, and had the whole thing out. It was very, very it was cool because they had a bunch of different stuff and they were able to do that. But that was one of the things that is amazing to see how you could this coloring process worked in terms of putting, painting and then putting the lines back on top and not screwing it up. Like that was the weird thing. I don't know, Marissa and Tamara, are you guys familiar with this? It seems like we're talking like outside. It's a very weird esoteric process, but it's the way books got colored.
Yeah,
I don't know that much about the blue line process. Is it similar to lithographic processes?
It's basically like the line art would be printed on acetate, and then there'd be another copy of the line art in like a light blue line on a piece of illustration board beneath the acetate, and you could go in, you could airbrush, paint, color all you wanted on the illustration board without destroying the line art, without the paint covering up the line art and stuff. And then you put it together, and it's almost like an animation cell kind of thing. The line art would be on top of the color.
It was also so that when they scanned the color guide, it wouldn't. The line art and the lettering wouldn't end up being on all four plates.
Right.
When you did it in a gray line, it might be maybe a 35% blue or something that you were coloring on. However, the acetate overlay should not have been at least what they reproduced from. They should have done a black plate printed at the same time on the same stock as the blue line.
But see, that's where Marvel screwed up.
Because, as I said, we would dry mount on heavier illustration board, both the black plate page and the blue lines. And then it was important that the colorist carried them around together at the same time. You didn't want to leave one in an air-conditioned office and then take the other, because they could, the boards could expand because of the temperatures, the humidity, etc. So it was very important that the piece of illustration board with the black plate stayed together with the blue line, so that one didn't change proportions in any way or shape.
Right. See, Marvel never did that. They just scanned the acetate. And that was the problem, because the acetate was thinner than the actual painted boards, and so the registration never worked out quite right.
Well, that's the advantage we had at DC with two people, Jack Adler and Saul Harrison, teaching us. But I know, like Lynn Varley, DC would have done the blue lines for her to color, but also at the same time black lines, and then DC in the office would have dry mounted them and made sure, if one got 15 seconds in the dry mount or 30 seconds, that the other the matching got 30, the same thing too, just so there'd be no, the same
No registration.
atmospheric heat, moisture, etc. conditions for both.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I ever did blue line, I did something like almost 1,800 trading cards, and they were all blue line, hand painted, over a period of like 2 years, because that's just how they had to be done back then. The computer coloring wasn't there yet, and and when that started, that was all a vector-based system. I can't even imagine trying to use the old Codbeard vector-based system to color comics.
So, I have one other, one kind of question about how do you approach the work when you get it? Like, we kind of talked about what work you look for, but once you get something, is there a time when you decide, hey, I want to approach this from a temperature perspective? I want to color this based on what the mood of the book is versus straight, bright colors or something like that. Is there something that you guys that you have a time to take that? Do you have input on that? Is there something that somebody says, I want you to do it this way, or I don't want you to do it that way? How does that process work, where you get something that's like kind of shades of tones and stuff versus clear, distinct coloring?
Jerry
I know Chris
Jones,
teaches how to do it. I'm just wondering.
I'm not going to jump in right away. Let someone else talk.
Jerry Jones, when he was writing The Shadow Strikes, gave very intelligent color notes. And I remember one of the ones he pointed, there was a series taking place in Hong Kong or something, storyline. And he mentioned to me that he noticed at sunset that sidewalks would pick up some of the pinkish tones of the sunset and the sky. Similarly, he mentioned there was a scene in a black and white movie theater, and he noticed that when seeing movies in black and white films in revival houses, that the audience would pick up some of the silver tones off the movie screen because that was what they were being lit in. And those led to, I think, some very good coloring on my end, but it was the input from the writer. We generally didn't. We generally were pretty much on our own. There'd occasionally be a color note on the side of a panel or something, but we seldom, received any instruction. And Adrian and I were generally pretty much on our own.
Yeah. And like Anthony said, we're basically the cinematographers. So, you're going to light and use a palette on a horror film a lot different, or a horror comic film, whatever, than you are an adventure film, than a swashbuckling film, than a romance, than a, so.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember who the artist was on Marvel's Barbie comic. Barbara Rausch, I think it was. But she had made a comment I saw in a comics fanzine about Marvel just giving Barbie to male colorists who just colored it the same way as a superhero comic. And she made a comment that no male could understand how to color Barbie. Well, I took that as a challenge. And I colored Sugar and Spike, and at that time I had a 5-year-old daughter into Barbies. And at the time Barbie was canceled because of Ron Perlman's misdocument, when Marvel suddenly lost 40% of its editors and such. But I was the colorist requested by the artist on Barbie. And I'd proven that a male colorist could color it, but I did not color it the way I'd color a superhero book or a horror or a war.
Right.
I colored it for 5 and 6 and 7-year-old little girls.
Amanda Connor got her start on Barbie comics at Marvel. That was one of her first books. So.
And then later I colored her on Gargoyles, the Disney animated series, and loved coloring her work.
She's actually doing Gargoyles covers again now.
Yeah,
Jimmy Palmiotti's covering. Jimmy's coloring her covers now.
Oh, that's not fair.
He wanted to try it.
What about Ely?
Yeah, it's the same with any of this stuff. It differs. Like, some people are very particular. Some people just are hands off. Like, I've had people send me, which I've actually liked. I don't mind it either way. If they just let me do whatever is fine. But I've had some people who have actually like, they'll go through their own pages and like do little markups, like this is this material, this is this thing. And it's like, I don't mind when people do that ahead of time because now I can plan to what they want and they've told me. And I don't mind doing just whatever I want to do because they're like, just like, okay, fine. This is maybe not what I expected, but I still like it. So either of those is fine, as long as, you know, we're on the same page. But if I'm having to decide on it myself, I just kind of, I start with what has to be there, like things that are decided already. Like if it's a superhero book, they are wearing certain costumes, you know.
Right.
So you have to match that. Or if it's an established scene or location, and I build off that. If they haven't told me something, then I just try to like fit the, you know, tone around that. I'll pick the background colors and stuff around them. And then I can do like color adjustments. So even though like their base color may be something, you can still like skew it, you know, warmer, cooler, or whatever. But yeah, I usually just have a starting point because that helps me make decisions. Like I'm not starting from scratch.
I found a lot of editors tend to be very, very literal, sometimes too literal sometimes, because yeah, you'll start with the basic, you know, the local color of a costume. You change the color because the lighting is coming in, the sun, you know, sunset, something like that. And then you'll say, well, I can't recognize that character anymore. That's crazy. We can't do that. But they're lit by fire. They're rescuing somebody in a fire-lit building. Yes, but we need to see that Superman blue or Spider-Man blue or whatever. It's like, it's not going to be the same blue if they're in a burning building, you know. But literal editors are kind of the bane of my existence sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Marissa?
I
Well,
usually start from clarity, like whatever I think will make it most clear, it being the goal of the piece, right? So if the goal of the piece is to have a really moody comic, then I'm going to start designing things for moodiness, and like try to figure out how I can make a plan where I can change the palettes really strongly throughout it. But if it's a licensed thing and I just need to match stuff as accurately as possible, then I'm trying to think about how to use like values and what other cheats I have. Well, none of that's cheating, but what tools I have in my toolbox that can give clarity without deviating from what the licensor wants. So it's always like, for me, the first step is always identifying what the question is and then figuring out the answer from there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, it is. I spend a lot of time reading comic books, and one of the things that I take a lot of care with is, you know, while I read the story, and the story and the line art is kind of a condensed thing. Like both of them are telling something, but there are the things that make a comic book really great are the lettering and the coloring, because without them being really great, it's just going to be average, even if the story and the line art and the writing is good. Because sometimes I find that, you know, lettering and coloring can really elevate something to a high level, and being able to understand how that adds to the story is a critical piece to reading comics. And thank you all for joining us tonight and celebrating coloring, because it's just the lifeblood, the decoration to what makes me, you know, happiest. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Yeah.
Is there anything anybody wants to shout out, talk about, any other questions you guys have for each other? Because I've exhausted mine, and I'm happy for that.
Paul, what's your doggy's name?
Ignacio.
Oh.
Well,
Yeah,
Anthony,
sorry, he was getting a little, he's like been jumping on me through this entire thing. It's like, come sit on my lap for a minute. You'll be happy, and then you can get down. And yeah, he was alone all day. We were at the DMV all day. We just moved. I'm actually in temporary housing right now. So he's alone all day. We came home, and I immediately had to jump on here, which is why I was so late logging in, Bob. Sorry, but
no worries.
Yeah, he was getting really, really restless because I wasn't paying attention to him. So
my dogs have been very, very good during this.
They are adorable. They are adorable
I have
dogs.
I have 4 dogs, but the 2 dachshunds are descended from dogs I bred and owned 30-some years ago.
Wow.
I've had the same family of champion dachshunds for 36 years now, going back to my current dog's great-great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Wow.
Impressive.
And the male's a champion, the female's a grand champion. But they're descended from dogs who occasionally visited DC Comics offices when we were turning in work. So
that wouldn't happen today, I'm sure.
We're
lucky to let freelancers up there once in a while.
Can I just tell a wonderful non-coloring related story about DC in the 70s, just to give you an idea of what the company was like then?
Ramon will love for you to do that.
This is the story of how John Workman and Bob Smith got their first professional assignments. And they had come out from Washington State to a New York comic convention. I think it was a SulinCon, JulyCon. And they'd brought their portfolios, and they'd met Jerry Conway, who was a part-time editor at DC at that time, and they'd made an appointment to bring their portfolios in and have them show them around the DC offices. And while I speak probably louder than I should, they both are quite soft-spoken people, and so they arrived at DC, and they were told that Jerry Conway was in a meeting, and they'd have to wait. And a while later, Bob Rozakis passes by, and he sees them, these 2 young men with portfolios, waiting in the 6th floor lobby, and he says, "Hey guys, who are you here to see?" And they said, in their soft-spoken way, "Oh, we're here to see Conway, but he's in a meeting." And Bob said, "Oh no, the meeting's over. I was in that meeting. I'll bring you to his office." And he brings them down past Jerry Conway's office to the corner office of Carmine Infantino, president and publisher and art director of DC. Of course, legendary Flash artist. But and he says, "Hey, Carmine, these are the 2 guys waiting to show you their portfolios." And Bob Smith and John Workman are horrified and said, "Oh no, we're here to see Conway, Jerry Conway, not Carmine." And Carmine laughs and says, "Hey boys, I've got 10 minutes for free. Why don't you show me what you got?" And he liked Bob Smith's inking, and he called Joe Orlando in, and Bob left with a Ramona Fraden Plastic Man story to ink.
Wow.
And he liked John Workman's lettering, and he called Jack Adler in, and John started the next morning as a staff production artist on staff. Wow. But DC in 1975 was so casual that you could get in to see the president of the company in the corner office by accident when you weren't intending to. And I just, love that period at DC. It wouldn't have happened 20 years later or whatever.
Yeah.
Well, so 20 years later or 15 years later,
or probably 10 years later. But
because when I was about 18 or 19, so yeah, it was about 12 years later than that. I went to the DC they were at 666, and I walked up. I got in the elevator, and I went up to the DC's floor, and I opened the elevator, and I looked out, and there was a door, and I closed the elevator and went back downstairs. And that's as far as I got.
That's a lot better than what I did.
Well, your story's better. Go ahead. Come on.
No.
Okay. Here's a good one. I'll try and keep it short. When I did my first job, actually it was my second job at Marvel. My first job at Marvel was a small graphic novel. My second job at Marvel was Adventures of Captain America. And I remember being really mad the colorists didn't get their names on the covers and didn't get royalties because, when Dark Knight came out, Lynn Varley got her name on the cover.
Yeah.
So I was up at the Marvel offices on a very rare trip to New York, and I think Tom DeFalco had just taken over as editor-in-chief after Shooter had left. And I was going to find out what was going on, why colorists weren't getting their name on the covers, and why we weren't getting royalties. It was about 1985, 86, something like that, maybe a little bit later. But the secretary outside of DeFalco's office had gotten up to go get some coffee or something. So I just walked past the desk and walked into his office and sat down and said, "Hi, I'm this new colorist, and I want to talk to you about royalties and credits on covers." And to his credit, he was very gentlemanly, did not throw me out, which he could have, did not blackball me from ever working at Marvel again. We've talked about it several times since then. Took a long time for them to do royalties and cover
regrets
credits,
it.
though. But
Well, for a long time, the reason colorists didn't get credits is they were the last thing along the line.
yeah, because there
And
was
the
no time to put
letterer
them in the
would know
credits.
who the letterer was on a book. But at the
Yeah.
time the story was drawn, and for some strange reason, even when Adrian was on Batman for 17 years on all the Batman books, they generally would leave the colorist credit off, and it would be lettered in production. But for many years, one wouldn't necessarily know who was going to color the book when the book was, going through production.
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you again, everyone. We made it through.
sorry for the technical difficulties on my end.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony, for doing this. You were a great addition to having, and I'm so thankful that you agreed to do this. It was wonderful meeting you. And Marissa is the first time we've met. Tamara, we've only met very briefly. I don't know if you probably don't remember, but we did meet at FlameCon a couple of years ago.
Oh, okay.
And if you ever have me back, I will have a set of earphones and be
we are going to do this. This is an annual event, so we will do it next year. And if anybody wants to come, we'll figure it out.
Once a year, we're worthy.
Well, listen, you want to talk to me, we can talk, because I'll talk comics with anybody anytime. But we're going to do Colorist Appreciation Day next year.
Awesome.
And I hope everybody had a great day. And we appreciate you. And I forgot to use the live and living color line that I was given because we're doing color, but I'll throw it at the end. Thanks, everybody. Thanks
Thank
to
you.
the chat
Thank
for making it entertaining. And I hope I had a good time.
I'd
Thank
like
you for having
to say also that I'm actually a fan of everyone here. So it was really great to meet a couple of you for the first time. And Marissa, I'll see you in a few weeks. Paul, I don't get to see you enough.
Yeah, I haven't been to a con since the I've been to one con since pandemic, so I'll start getting out there again more.
Marissa, we were on a panel together about 5 years ago at Comic-Con.
Yep. We were. Yep. I'm glad you remembered.
And then we went to dinner afterwards.
We went to the dinner. Yeah, it was really nice. I had a great time. This is my first time meeting you, Paul. And it's
Yeah, nice meeting you too.
That's awesome. All right, everybody. Have a great night. Happy Colorist Appreciation Day.
Thanks for having me.
Goodbye.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.